When Lisa, my wife's younger sister, showed up on our doorstep with a suitcase in hand and tears streaking her face, I didn't think much of it. She just ended things with her boyfriend, again, and Sarah told me she needed somewhere to stay for a few weeks. Just until she gets back on her feet, Sarah had said. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time. Lisa was always a little dramatic, the kind of person who turned every breakup into a Shakespearean tragedy. She was harmless enough, though, and the kids loved having their aunt around. So I agreed, figuring it was a small sacrifice for family. At first, everything seemed normal. Lisa helped out around the house, cooked dinner a few nights, and kept Sarah company while I worked late shifts. But after a few days, I noticed Sarah acting differently. She'd always been attentive, asking about my day, making sure we had time together after the kids went to bed. Now, she seemed distracted. Her phone was always in her hand or tucked away in her pocket, and she'd leave the room to take calls or answer texts. When I asked who it was, she'd wave it off. Work stuff, she'd say, or just catching up with an old friend. One night, I came home late and found Sarah and Lisa sitting in the living room, talking in hushed tones. They stopped the moment they noticed me, sharing a quick look before Sarah gave me her usual bright smile. "Hey, how was work?" she asked, her tone a little too cheerful. "Fine," I said, glancing between them. "What's going on?" "Nothing," Lisa said quickly, standing up and stretching. "Just girl talk. I'm heading to bed." I watched her leave, something about her smile making my stomach twist. "Is she okay?" I asked Sarah once we were alone. "She's fine," Sarah said, brushing it off. "She's just dealing with a lot right now. You know how she is." I nodded, but the uneasy feeling lingered. Lisa had always been dramatic, sure, but there was something different about the way Sarah was acting. She was jumpy, distracted, like she was hiding something. Over the next week, the tension in the house grew. Sarah and Lisa spent more time together, whispering in corners or leaving the house for errands that took hours. When I asked about it, Sarah just shrugged. "We're just trying to keep her busy," she said, but I wasn't convinced. Something was off. I just didn't know what, yet. It was late on a Thursday night when I first overheard something that didn't sit right with me. I had just finished some work in my office and went downstairs to grab a drink of water. The house was quiet, but faint voices came from the living room. Sarah and Lisa were talking again, their tones low but intense. I froze at the base of the stairs, listening. "You have to be more careful," Sarah whispered, her voice sharp. "If he finds out." "He won't," Lisa interrupted. "Relax. It's fine." I leaned closer, my grip tightening on the banister. They were silent for a moment, and I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. "You don't understand," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "If this goes wrong, it's not just me. It's all of us." "All of us?" Lisa let out a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You're the one who wanted this. I'm just helping you keep it together." I stepped back, my mind racing. What the hell were they talking about? As I moved into the kitchen to make some noise and give myself an excuse to be up, they stopped talking the second I flicked on the light. I walked into the living room, trying to act casual, but the way they both stiffened told me they'd been talking about something they didn't want me to hear. "What are you two still doing up?" I asked, glancing between them. Sarah forced a smile. "Just catching up. Couldn't sleep." Lisa got up, stretching. "I was just heading to bed. Good night." She left quickly, leaving Sarah and me alone. I watched her, waiting for her to say something, but she just stared at the coffee table, fiddling with the edge of her sweater. "You okay?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Yeah," she said quickly, flashing me a tight smile. "Just tired." She got up before I could ask anything else, kissing me on the cheek and heading upstairs. "You should get some rest too," she called over her shoulder. I stayed in the living room, staring at the spot where she'd been sitting. There was a nagging feeling in my gut, something I couldn't ignore. Sarah wasn't just distracted. She was hiding something. The next morning, I decided to pay closer attention. I started noticing small things I hadn't picked up on before. Lisa was always at Sarah's side, the two of them whispering or exchanging glances whenever they thought I wasn't looking. And Sarah's phone? It was practically glued to her hand, and she'd leave the room every time it buzzed. That afternoon, while Sarah and Lisa were out, I saw her phone charging on the kitchen counter. My hands hesitated over it. I wasn't the kind of guy who went through his wife's phone, but something about the night before wouldn't leave me alone. I picked it up and unlocked it. She didn't have a passcode. I scrolled through her messages, looking for anything unusual. Most of them were harmless, chats with friends, messages from work. But then I saw a thread with Lisa. The most recent text stopped me cold. Make sure he doesn't see anything. We can't afford to slip up now. My chest tightened as I read the exchange. Lisa, I told you. I've got it under control. Sarah, you'd better. If he finds out, it's over for me. What the hell was over for her? I set the phone down quickly as I heard the front door open, my heart racing. Sarah and Lisa walked in, laughing about something. Sarah froze when she saw me in the kitchen, her smile faltering for just a second before she recovered. You're home early, she said, her voice a little too casual. Yeah, I said, watching her closely. I thought I'd take the afternoon off. She nodded, moving past me to put her things down. Lisa followed, avoiding my gaze as she grabbed a drink from the fridge. The tension in the room was thick, but neither of them said anything. I knew I couldn't push too hard yet, not without more information. But something was definitely going on, and I wasn't about to let it slide. After finding those messages on Sarah's phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. The cryptic texts, the hushed conversations, the quick glances between Sarah and Lisa when they thought I wasn't watching. It all added up to something, but I still didn't have a full picture. I started paying closer attention, watching Sarah's every move while trying not to make it obvious. It didn't take long to notice a pattern. Every few days, Sarah would come up with some excuse to leave the house, a quick run to the store, or grabbing a coffee with Lisa. Sometimes, Lisa would tag along. Other times, she'd stay behind, offering to keep an eye on the kids while I worked in my office. One evening, as I sat in the living room flipping through emails, Sarah emerged from the bedroom, dressed like she was heading out for a night on the town. Her hair was styled, her makeup flawless, and she wore a dress I hadn't seen in years, one I distinctly remembered buying for an anniversary dinner. Where are you going? I asked, keeping my tone casual. Girls' night, she said, flashing me a quick smile as she grabbed her purse. Lisa and I are meeting a friend for drinks. Lisa appeared a moment later, more dressed down in jeans and a sweater, but the way she avoided my gaze didn't sit right with me. Which friend? I asked, leaning back in my chair. Sarah hesitated, her fingers tightening around her purse strap. Just an old coworker of mine. You don't know her. I nodded slowly, letting the lie hang in the air. All right, have fun. She smiled, leaning down to kiss me on the cheek, but I didn't return the gesture. As soon as the door closed behind them, I grabbed my jacket and keys. They didn't know it, but I'd installed a tracking app on Sarah's phone earlier that day. It wasn't something I ever thought I'd do, but I needed answers, and I wasn't going to sit around waiting for them to fall into my lap. I opened the app and watched the little that represented her phone move across the screen. She wasn't heading downtown toward the bars. She was driving out of town, toward the industrial part of the city. I followed at a safe distance, my heart pounding as I tried to piece together what she could possibly be doing out there. When the dot finally stopped, I pulled over a block away and killed the engine. Sarah's car was parked in front of a small warehouse with a faded sign out front. Lisa's car was there too. I sat there for a moment, debating my next move. Did I go inside? Wait to see what happened? Before I could decide, the door to the warehouse opened, and two men walked out, laughing and lighting cigarettes. I didn't recognize them, but the sight of them made my stomach churn. A few minutes later, Lisa appeared, followed by Sarah. They were smiling, chatting with the men like it was the most normal thing in the world. One of the men handed Sarah something, a small bag she tucked into her purse. Lisa said something that made them all laugh, her hand resting briefly on one of the men's arms. I clenched the steering wheel, my knuckles white. This wasn't a girls' night. It wasn't even close. They didn't stay long. Sarah and Lisa got back into their cars and drove off in different directions. I followed Sarah, keeping my distance until she pulled into the driveway. When she walked into the house, I was already sitting on the couch, waiting. She froze when she saw me, her smile faltering for just a moment before she recovered. "You're up late," she said, slipping off her shoes. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, my tone even. She hesitated, then nodded. "Well, I'm going to bed. Long night." I didn't stop her. Not yet. I needed to be sure before I confronted her, and right now, all I had were more questions. The next morning, I couldn't stop replaying what I'd seen. The warehouse, the strange men, the laughter. It all gnawed at me, demanding answers. Sarah moved around the house like nothing was wrong, humming as she packed lunches for the kids. Lisa sat at the kitchen table, scrolling on her phone, her face calm and unreadable. I tried to act normal, but every word I exchanged with them felt like a lie. The tension was unbearable. I decided I needed more proof, something undeniable that I could confront Sarah with. Later that afternoon, while Sarah took the kids to the park, I searched the house for anything that might give me a clue. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for, but I knew there had to be something. It didn't take long to find it. In the back of Sarah's closet, tucked behind a stack of old shoe boxes, was a small, locked box. My heart pounded as I pulled it out and carried it to the kitchen. I searched through the junk drawer until I found a small screwdriver, prying the lock open with shaking hands. Inside, I found exactly what I didn't want to see. There were photos, printed snapshots of Sarah with one of the men I'd seen at the warehouse. They were sitting together at a bar in one picture, standing too close in another. But it was the last photo that made my stomach drop. It was taken in a hotel room, Sarah sitting on the bed in lingerie, the man behind her with his hands on her shoulders. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The air left my lungs, and I had to sit down, the photos clutched tightly in my hand. Underneath the photos was a small bag filled with receipts, hotel bookings, restaurant bills, even a receipt for a jewelry store. All of them dated within the past 6 months. But the worst part was a note, scrawled in Sarah's handwriting. "Lisa, thanks for covering for me. I owe you big time." I stared at the note, my mind racing. Lisa knew. She'd been covering for Sarah this entire time, lying to my face, pretending to be the supportive sister when she was just as guilty. When Sarah and the kids came home, I was still sitting at the kitchen table, the box in front of me. She walked in, her cheerful expression fading the moment she saw my face. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting down her bag. I didn't say anything. I just pushed the box toward her. She froze when she saw it, her eyes wide. "Where did you get that?" "In your closet," I said, my voice cold. "Care to explain?" Her hands trembled as she opened the box, flipping through the photos and receipts. Her face went pale, and she looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. "Mark, Don't," I snapped, cutting her off. "Don't even try to lie to me. I saw you, Sarah, at the warehouse, with him, and now this?" I pointed to the photos. "How long has this been going on?" She broke down, tears streaming down her face as she shook her head. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she sobbed. It just happened. I was lonely, and he was there, and I—" "Save it," I said, standing up and pacing the room. "You weren't lonely. You had me. You had this family. You chose this. And Lisa—" I turned to glare at her, who had walked into the kitchen during the confrontation. "You knew. You covered for her. What the hell is wrong with you?" Lisa's face turned red, and for the first time, she didn't have a snappy comeback. "I was just trying to help," she said weakly. "Help?" I laughed bitterly. "You think helping her destroy our family is helping? You're both disgusting." Sarah collapsed into a chair, her head in her hands. "Mark, please," she whispered. "I love you. I made a mistake, but I love you." I stared at her, the woman I thought I knew, and felt nothing but anger and betrayal. "You don't get to say that," I said quietly. "You don't get to claim love after everything you've done." I walked out of the kitchen, leaving them both behind. I needed to get out of the house, to clear my head before I did something I'd regret. I didn't go far, just a drive around the block, but it was enough to calm the storm raging inside me. When I got back, the house was quiet. The kids were upstairs, thankfully unaware of the chaos unfolding below. Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table, her head bowed, while Lisa leaned against the counter, arms crossed and avoiding my gaze. All right, I said, my voice low and steady as I walked in. We're going to have this out. No more lies. No more excuses. I want the truth, all of it, and I want it now. Sarah glanced up at me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised a hand to stop her. No. Start with this, I said, tossing the photos and receipts onto the table. She flinched, her hand hovering over the evidence like it might burn her. Mark, just say it. I snapped, my patience gone. How long has this been going on? She swallowed hard, her voice barely audible. 6 months. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. 6 months. And you had Lisa helping you? Covering for you? Lisa finally spoke, her voice defensive. I wasn't trying to hurt you, Mark. I was trying to help her figure things out. Figure things out? I said, turning to glare at her. What kind of person does this? What kind of person helps their sister cheat on her husband? She wasn't happy, Lisa said, her voice rising. And honestly, you didn't seem to notice. You're always at work, always distracted. She needed someone who... Don't, I said, my voice cutting through her words. Don't you dare try to put this on me. I was here. I was working for this family, for her, and for our kids. Don't you dare act like this is my fault. Lisa fell silent, her defiance crumbling under my anger. I turned back to Sarah, who was crying again, tears dripping onto the photos in front of her. And him? Who is he? Who the hell is the guy in these pictures? She hesitated, her hands trembling as she wiped her face. It's Eric. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Eric was someone I considered a friend, someone who had been to our house for barbecues and family gatherings. Someone I trusted. Eric? I said, my voice low and dangerous. You're sleeping with Eric? Sarah nodded, her head bowed in shame. It wasn't supposed to happen. It just... Stop, I said, slamming my hand on the table. Don't tell me it just happened. That's not an excuse. You made a choice. Every single time. You made a choice. The room fell silent, the weight of her betrayal hanging heavy between us. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. And Lisa? What's your excuse? What did you get out of this? Lisa looked at me, her face pale. I didn't get anything out of it. I didn't want her to feel alone. Alone, I repeated, shaking my head. You're both unbelievable. I stood there for a moment, staring at the two of them, the anger boiling inside me. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make them feel even a fraction of the pain they'd caused me. But instead, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, heading upstairs to check on the kids. They were playing in their room, blissfully unaware of the turmoil downstairs. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching them, and felt a wave of sadness wash over me. They deserved better than this. They deserved better than her. When I went back downstairs, Sarah and Lisa were gone. I didn't care where they'd gone or if they'd come back. All I cared about was figuring out what to do next. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the photos and receipts, the reality of it all sinking in. My wife, my partner of 10 years, had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and her sister, someone I trusted to be part of our family, had helped her do it. I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let this slide. The next morning, I woke up to an empty house. Sarah and Lisa hadn't returned, and for a moment, the silence felt almost comforting. But then reality sank back in, and the weight of everything hit me again like a freight train. The betrayal wasn't just some bad dream I could shake off. It was real, and it wasn't going away. I spent most of the morning trying to focus on the kids, who had no idea their world was about to be turned upside down. I made them breakfast, helped them with their homework, and played their favorite games, all while my mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. Every time I looked at them, my anger towards Sarah grew. How could she do this? Not just to me, but to them? Around midday, Sarah finally came home. Alone. She walked into the house cautiously, like she wasn't sure if she was welcome. I didn't say anything, just watched as she stood in the entryway, clutching her bag like a lifeline. "Where are the kids?" she asked softly. "In their room," I said, my voice cold. "But don't think you're walking back in here like nothing happened." She flinched but didn't argue. Can we talk? Talk? I laughed bitterly. You want to talk now? After everything? Yes, she said, her voice trembling. I need to explain. There's nothing left to explain, Sarah, I interrupted. You lied to me. You cheated. And your sister helped you do it. What more is there to say? She stared at me, tears filling her eyes. I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. But Mark, please, don't let this ruin everything. We can fix this. We can go to therapy. We can. Stop, I said, holding up a hand. Don't you dare talk about fixing things. You destroyed this. You, not me. And therapy isn't going to change the fact that I can't trust you anymore. Her tears spilled over, but I didn't feel the slightest bit of sympathy. What about the kids? She asked, her voice breaking. They need us. They need their family. The kids will be fine, I said firmly, because I'm going to make sure they're fine. I've already called a lawyer, Sarah. I'm filing for divorce. The words hung in the air like a bomb, and for a moment, she just stared at me, as if she couldn't believe what she'd heard. Divorce? She whispered. Yes, I said, my voice unwavering. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. Her knees buckled, and she sank into a chair, sobbing into her hands. But I didn't let her tears sway me. I'd given her everything, trusted her completely, and she'd thrown it all away. There was no coming back from that. By the time the kids came out of their room, Sarah had composed herself, but the tension between us was impossible to miss. The kids sensed it immediately, their cheerful chatter fading as they looked between us with confused expressions. Are you okay, Mommy? My daughter asked, her small hand reaching for Sarah's. Sarah forced a smile, nodding quickly. I'm fine, sweetheart. Everything's fine. But it wasn't fine. It would never be fine again. That evening, I packed a bag and left the house. I couldn't stay there, not with Sarah under the same roof. I didn't tell the kids the full truth, just that I needed to stay somewhere else for a while. They were too young to understand, and I didn't want to burden them with the details of their mother's betrayal. I stayed at a friend's house that night, my mind racing with everything that needed to be done. The divorce, the custody arrangements, the financial fallout. It was overwhelming. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let Sarah walk away from this unscathed. The next day, I met with my lawyer to start the process. I explained everything, Sarah's affair, Lisa's involvement, and the evidence I'd gathered. My lawyer listened carefully, nodding as I laid it all out. You've got a strong case for custody, she said finally, especially with the photos and receipts. But you need to be prepared. This won't be easy. She'll fight back. I don't care, I said. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure the kids are safe. The wheels were in motion, and there was no turning back. The legal process moved faster than I expected, but not fast enough for me. Every day that Sarah stayed in the house with the kids felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I hated leaving them behind every night, but I couldn't bear to look at her face, knowing what she'd done. I spent my nights at Matt's place, brainstorming ways to take control of the situation. I wasn't content with just filing for divorce. Sarah and Lisa had destroyed our family, and I couldn't let them walk away unscathed. Then it hit me. Lisa's involvement was just as incriminating as Sarah's. She wasn't an innocent bystander. She had facilitated the affair, helped Sarah cover it up, and lied to my face. If I wanted to ensure the court saw the full extent of what had happened, I needed to make Lisa's role crystal clear. I started by gathering more evidence. I went through Sarah's emails, her texts, and even the cloud account I'd found before. The deeper I dug, the more I uncovered. Messages between her and Lisa discussing their plans, photos of them together at Eric's place, and receipts Lisa had signed on Sarah's behalf. One text exchange between them stood out. Sarah, Eric wants me to stay the night. Can you cover for me again? Lisa, of course. Just tell Mark you're with me. He won't question it. It was all there in black and white. Armed with this evidence, I met with my lawyer again. I want this included in the custody case, I told her, sliding the printed messages and photos across the table. She flipped through them, her expression unreadable. This is damning, she said finally. If the court sees this, it'll paint both Sarah and Lisa in a very unfavorable light. But are you sure you want to involve her sister? It could complicate things. I'm sure, I said firmly. She's just as guilty as Sarah, and the court needs to know exactly what kind of environment my kids have been exposed to. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following week, and in the meantime, I decided to take things a step further. Lisa had a reputation for being the perfect, helpful sister, the one who always had Sarah's back. But I knew that if people saw her for who she really was, it would ruin her credibility. I reached out to a few mutual friends, casually dropping hints about what I'd uncovered. I didn't give away all the details, just enough to plant seeds of doubt. It didn't take long for the rumors to spread. By the time the hearing rolled around, the tension between Sarah and me was unbearable. She tried to reach out several times, begging me to reconsider the divorce, but I refused to engage. The only communication we had was through our lawyers. When the day finally came, I walked into the courtroom with a clear head and a mountain of evidence. Sarah sat at the opposite table, her expression a mix of guilt and defiance. Lisa wasn't there, but her involvement was about to be laid bare for everyone to see. My lawyer presented the evidence with precision, laying out the timeline of Sarah's affair and Lisa's role in covering it up. The texts, the photos, the receipts, it was all there, painting a picture of deceit and betrayal that was impossible to deny. Sarah's lawyer tried to downplay it, arguing that Lisa's actions were irrelevant to the custody case. But the judge wasn't convinced. "This speaks to the character of the individuals involved," she said firmly. "It's highly relevant." By the end of the hearing, it was clear the tide had turned in my favor. The judge ruled in my favor for primary custody, citing Sarah's poor judgment and the toxic environment she and Lisa had created. As I left the courthouse that day, a weight lifted off my shoulders. The battle wasn't over, but I'd won the most important part. My kids were safe, and Sarah and Lisa had been exposed for who they really were. The house felt heavier without her in it, like the walls still held onto the weight of everything that happened. But over time, that heaviness became something else: space. Space to breathe, space to think, space to rebuild. I wasn't sure how to fill it at first, but the silence was better than the chaos. The kids adjusted faster than I thought they would. Maybe it's because they're young, or maybe it's because I threw myself into making life as normal as possible for them. Saturday morning pancakes became a ritual, movie nights turned into laughter-filled marathons, and I started listening more when they talked about their day. Little things that I hadn't appreciated before took on a new meaning. One day, as I was clearing out some old boxes, I came across a photo album Sarah had left behind. I opened it out of curiosity, flipping through pictures of birthdays, holidays, and moments that felt like they belonged to someone else's life. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or regret. I just felt nothing. The memories didn't hurt anymore. I closed the album and shoved it into the donation pile. Some things weren't worth holding on to, but not everything was about leaving the past behind. I started reconnecting with parts of myself I'd forgotten. I fixed up the garage, not because I needed the space, but because it felt like reclaiming something. I built things with my hands: bookshelves, a toy chest for the kids, a coffee table for the living room. Each project felt like laying down a brick in a new foundation. I even tried dating again, though that was more of an experiment than anything else. A few dinners, some coffee dates. No sparks, but it reminded me that life was still moving, even if I wasn't ready to jump in just yet. As for Sarah, the pieces of her life seemed to scatter in all directions. Lisa moved out of state after the fallout, trying to escape the whispers and judgment. And Eric? He vanished, just like I figured he would. Mutual friends told me Sarah was working at a boutique and living in a small apartment. She kept her distance, which was exactly how I wanted it. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, I sat on the back porch with a glass of whiskey and let myself reflect. The stars were out, the air was cool, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was dragging a boulder uphill. I realized then that I wasn't just surviving, I was growing. The betrayal had cut deep, but it had also forced me to take a good, hard look at what mattered. I had spent so much time holding on to something that was already gone, and now I was learning how to let go. My life wasn't tied to someone else's choices anymore. It was mine, and I could shape it however I wanted. The kids came outside, sleepy but excited. "Dad, can we look at the stars with you?" my son asked, rubbing his eyes. I smiled and patted the spot next to me. They climbed into my lap, and we sat there together, staring at the vastness above us. In that moment, I knew we'd be okay.